Okay. Welcome, Rabbi Poupko. It is a pleasure to have you with us here this evening. How are you?
First of all, before I answer the question, I just want to say what a pleasure and an honor it is to be with you this evening, Rabbi Fishman, our revered and beloved colleague, the rabbi's rabbi, a man whose sage counsel is sought by many in the rabbinic community, and it's a humbling privilege to be with you.
Always the schmoozer. Your words are greatly appreciated.
And what did you ask me? I forget what you asked me.
We both know who has who on speed dial on their phones. I asked, how are you this evening? How are you doing?
I'm all right.
How was your day?
My day? Delightful. It was a busy day. There's a lot going on in the community. Unfortunately, not all of it positive.
Okay.
There's an uptick in cases in the community, and it's troubling. A couple of our schools have closed their doors temporarily for the next couple of weeks,
right.
Particularly in light of the holidays and people wanting to see the effects of some of the family gatherings that have taken place to make sure the kids are all okay before going back to school.
So it sounds like you have your hands full.
Yes, and dealing with some of the political repercussions of all of this.
Actually, let me jump straight into that. I have had in mind a devout Torah, and I would very much like you to share words of Torah with people who are watching this evening. But before we get to that, something that has been significantly concerning me, I know that it was among some of the top priorities when we made our decision to close both for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, in addition to the health risks that we saw climbing, in addition to the potential for literal pekuach nefesh, and a number of my community, unfortunately, have now contracted COVID-19, as the uptick that you just referred to is across our community. A secondary consideration, very much real, no less important, was the concept of Chilul Hashem, this concept where we make a vacuum where God should be, to literally desecrate God's name. In Judaism, we are doing one of two actions. We are promoting God, we are making God beloved in the eyes of those who witness and view our behavior, or we're doing the exact opposite. We're embarrassing God, and we're making people have a sense of looking down at the Jewish people, and we are the PR mechanism, if you will, for God's presence in this world. I'd like you to touch on a very sensitive subject with your eloquence and delicacy that you are known for, about the Jewish community and the religious Jewish community in particular, that may or may not publicly be congregating, may or may not be wearing masks or otherwise. And what do you make of this here in Montreal specifically and in the broader community?
First of all, just on a note about Chilul Hashem, let's remember when God seemingly condemned the Jews to severe punishment after the golden calf, Moshe's plea to God was not for mercy. Moshe's plea to God was Lama Yomru. Why will the people say you took them out of Egypt to harm them? In other words, Moshe understood that what happens to us is inextricably linked with the standing of God in the minds of man. And therefore, the plea for the salvation of the Jewish people was the reputation of God himself. So this idea that how Jews behave is, again, completely attached to how God and his Torah will be understood and embraced by the world is an old idea. It's as old as the Jewish people. Now, listen, we all know what's going on. There's no question there is a significant uptick in cases in Outremont, in the Divimi area, and Brobillon. We know that. And we know it's not limited to Montreal, although I will focus on Montreal. This is the same story in New York, it's the same story in Israel. And we also know that before COVID started, the Jewish conversation was about anti-Semitism, unfortunately. It was the aftermath of Pittsburgh, Poway, Jersey City, Muncie. It was the uptick in assaults in neighborhoods in Brooklyn on Orthodox Jews. That was the conversation. Weeks before COVID became the story, I was at a march in New York, No Hate, No Fear, hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers against the anti-Semitism that occurred in a violent manner almost every week in New York. And then obviously the conversation shifted, but the anti-Semitism didn't. I mean, I just read a 30-page report on how COVID triggered anti-Semitism, the bizarre conspiracy theories centered on Jews owning pharmaceutical companies, a whole host of different conspiracy theories. And again, in all of its normal quarters, the extreme left, white supremacists, Muslim radicals, the same people with new vocabulary. And then you had in Montreal the unfortunate confluence of events at the beginning. There was people talking about a wedding. People talked about, what was going on in Outremont. People were talking about non-compliance in certain areas. And let's remember, the same week, literally a night before or 2 nights before the wedding that everyone loves to talk about, there were 1,200 people at the Montreal Symphony. I mean, there was this unhealthy and unfair focus and stigmatization of the Jewish community.
That's a really important
now,
yeah.
and that happened back again in March and April. And now we may see it again. There will be an article in the Gazette either tomorrow or the next day about this very issue. And that may trigger further coverage in the French media, which hasn't happened yet in this second wave. And it's not so much the coverage, but if you read the comment sections in the French media, vile anti-Semitism was spewed back in the spring. A terrible, terrible kind of hatred. However, we do need to recognize that there is a disproportionate occurrence of COVID in ultra-Orthodox neighborhoods. There is. Much of it has to do simply with the risk factors. Risk factors we all know: population density, multi-generational families, large families living in small quarters. This triggers outbreak. But also there was some non-compliance. At the beginning, it was lack of information. Today, I don't have an answer for it. The non-compliance in certain parts of the ultra-Orthodox community is bewildering and painful. There's no question there is a lack of compliance. And it's not the fault of the rabbis who have spoken consistently and vigorously about compliance. But unfortunately, despite the stereotype of ultra-Orthodox Jews, they don't always listen to their rabbis. And they find compliance very difficult. The other part of this is, and this is hard for anyone really to grasp, or most people to grasp, every story an Orthodox Jew is told from the time they're children, I shouldn't just say Orthodox, all Jews are told, is the only reason any of us are here is that in the worst of circumstances, no matter what was going on, no matter what was being done to us, we kept doing what we did, which is go to synagogue and join together and pray together and be together. And the only reason we're all here is that against daunting odds, we kept doing, in the worst conditions, everything we always did. And for people to now be told that during this crisis, we have to turn everything off, again, it took a long time for many to get their heads around. Some have yet to really appreciate it, and that's a tragedy. But again, they are far from the only community that are non-compliant, right? Whether it's the marches downtown, whether it's karaoke bars, whether it's students, whatever it is, there is widespread non-compliance, unfortunately, in many areas. Most people are compliant, but there are pockets of non-compliance in all communities. And one thing we should all be grateful for, and we sometimes forget to focus on what doesn't happen. This government of Quebec, from the very beginning till today, whenever asked about the Jewish community, has refused to take the bait from journalists, has consistently said it's in every community. They have gone out of their way. We've had conversations with them. We thank them for this, and we've been involved with them. They have refused to ever stigmatize the Jewish community. In New York this week, a different approach was taken. They felt it was necessary, whatever it was. But here in Montreal, here in Quebec, the government has refused to do that. Journalists is a different story. Comment section is certainly a different story. But the government has been fastidiously careful about in any way stigmatizing a community. I was on 2 Zoom calls with Dr. Ruda in the past week. He re-emphasized this. I was on a call with religious leaders from many different communities, from the Catholic community, from the Anglican community, from the Muslim community, and he persistently refused to single out or in any way that would stigmatize any particular community. But again, we would hope everyone would be compliant.
You've touched on a variety of different themes and topics in that exhaustive and very fascinating answer. I just want to focus on one of it, and it was, you didn't say it in these words, but the Vahisha Amda argument. I think there's something very beautiful, ennobling, and uplifting for the Jewish people, almost in our DNA. Maybe there's a sense of not even realizing it in a way that we can articulate it, but in a sense of, we have been through the worst of times and survived. We've been through the most catastrophic of circumstances and yet triumphed at the end of the day. And perhaps there is this almost foolhardy assurance that we believe in our guts, we'll get through this as well. We'll get through this as well. And I believe that in the best, if we were to be malamed zchut, to find the positive in the reason why there may be some non-compliance, perhaps there is this sense of, we will get through this, get over it, and thrive as a result of this.
Well, here's the thing.
That's important.
I think we all know that that which is best
starting to rain a little heavy in the West Island. Going to give it a second. I may move into my house. I'm going to give it another few seconds. I'll see if my computer can withstand, but it's starting to actually rain now. So you keep...
Why don't you move? Well, I'll talk while you move. How's that?
You keep talking and I'm going to go indoors.
Right.
But
Even though you called my first answer exhaustive, which I took as an insult, I will continue.
In England, it has a very different connotation. It's meant to be...
Here's what I would say, is that there is no human trait which does not have positive expressions and also negative expressions. We are a stubborn people, and it is because of our stubbornness that we're still here. We didn't give in. We didn't surrender. We didn't assimilate. We didn't give up our identity. We kept being Jews. And that instinct is deeply embedded in our collective DNA, and maybe a little more so in the ultra-Orthodox community, and maybe sometimes to our detriment. And this time it was to our detriment. We needed to stop doing what we always do. And it hurt us. There's no question it hurt us. And I don't mean to excuse it. I mean to explain it. There's no question human life comes first.
Right.
And the secondary concern is what you mentioned earlier, is the notion of, we have to understand as Jews that we do not enjoy the luxury of acting in thinking about ourselves. Everything we do represents the community. We don't have the luxury other people have. We know that what we do is that it creates an impression about all of us. And that is for the positive and for the negative. And that's the reality under which we operate. And therefore, there's no question that the behavior of some during COVID, which do not reflect, sufficient concern for health and life, that behavior hurt us all, and it hurts the standing. But again, we need to give thanks to those who didn't exploit this, meaning the government. But we also need to continue to be vigilant and condemn those who exploit it in the way they've exploited many other things in the past. And we know who they are, and we know that they continue to do it.
Thank you. That's very well put. Let me change tracks for a little bit and ask you the impossible question. If you had a crystal ball, I know that you are not a Navi or the child of a Navi. What does the future hold? Future being the next 2 weeks, future being the next 2 months. What is your short-term prediction for where we are going from now until Hanukkah?
Here's what I think.
2 weeks, next 2 months.
Here's what I think. Again, I'm so far from the guy you should be asking this question. But my gut is that the first round of this, March, April, May, June, when we were all closed down, we stepped up and we all did the right thing. We all shut down. We moved to Zoom, as we still are on in many times. And this community took care of each other. We took care of the vulnerable. We took care of the lonely. We took care of those who were in need. Then we had a bit of we had a respite over the summer. People got out, and normal life was returning. This second wave is going to be tougher for people. The sense that we went through it, and then we came out the other end and things were better, but now that they're worse again, is going to create a lot of strains in families, a lot of strains in people's lives, economic, emotional, on many levels. It's going to be a tough few months. There will be a vaccine, according to most, sometime in the winter. The rollout will take as long as till next summer. But I think as soon as we have a vaccine, that will lift people's spirits. At least they'll know there's a light at the end of the tunnel. And hope is, again, something we need and need desperately. But I believe the next couple of months are going to be tough until there's a vaccine announcement or a better treatment announcement, because to have to go through this a second time in 1 year is going to be too much for a lot of people. But I want to project even further ahead. I want to project 40 and 60 years ahead. And I'll tell you what I mean. Our grandchildren, your grandchildren, who are going to be younger than mine, your grandchildren, your grandchildren's children are going to be given school projects on what happened in the year 2020, COVID-19. They're going to be given school reports. And they're going to look back and they're going to study what happened. And some of them may even say, what did the Jewish community do? How did Jewish communities behave during COVID-19? And what they're going to read is a remarkable story, a story of inspiration, a story that does us honor. It's a story of communities that came together, whether in Montreal or in Los Angeles or New York and Boston, Chicago, Toronto, wherever we were. We continued to educate our children. Synagogues continued to reach out and to teach and to uplift their people. We took care of the vulnerable. We fed the hungry. We did all the right stuff. As the weeks of COVID go on, we are continuing to write beautiful chapters in the history of Jewish compassion, Jewish concern, and Jewish self-reliance and Jewish resilience. Those are the chapters we're writing right now. Not all of us are cognizant of the fact, but all of our children and all of our grandchildren are going to remember the way we behaved during this time, how we came together and didn't fall apart, how the things that were most important to us in life weren't affected by COVID. Our faith, our families, our communities, those things were not damaged. Those things, in fact, kept us strong. Those things, in fact, allowed us not only to survive, but to flourish as a people when we come out of this. And even during this period, how many more people are engaged in study, how many more people are engaged in their synagogues, how many families have and really come together during this period. I know we all know their families in stress, and we know that impact can be lasting. But there are so many more beautiful stories of the strength of people realizing that their whole world is a sukkah, that every day is a sukkah. We go into it for a week to remind us what it's like all year round. We're more vulnerable than we realized. And people needed to realize that and wake up to that. And we're vulnerable, but the things that keep us strong, the things that keep us together, our families, our commitments, our values, our ethics, our faith, those things kept us together during this period. And 60 years from now, when those school reports are going to be written by young high schoolers, they're going to read us stories of Jewish communities that stepped up. And it's going to be a beautiful story. And we're writing those chapters right now.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. So the message of Sukkot for you is that the whole year round we live in a sukkah. It's just that once a year, we're given a week to remind us of our vulnerability, and for us to realize just how sometimes we're not in the control and in the powerful position that we believe we are. And it's our sense of togetherness, our love of family and community, our faith that keeps us strong. That is so beautiful. That is so beautiful. Thank you so much, Rabbi Poupko.
My pleasure.
I appreciate the very important discussion at the beginning on the Jewish community, handled with great sensitivity and respect. I appreciate the incredible sense of looking to the future. And I love how you finish with that message of hope, that as bleak as it is, we're going to look back on this period with a sense of pride. Good for you. Yesher koach to you. And thank you to you. I know a lot of people are watching this right now, whether live or will be watching it later on video. There is a well-known secret in our community, and that is all of the work that you do behind the scenes. Very few people realize just what is done behind the scenes, and oftentimes with you spearheading so much of it. For what even I myself am not aware of, and on behalf of the community, we thank you for what you do, both publicly and privately, on behalf of all of us, because if ever there was a person that represented the entirety of the community, it's yourself. Thank you for taking time out of your very busy schedule to speak with me, and for all of our viewers to listen to you this evening. It's deeply appreciated. You look like you have a beautiful sukkah that you're in right now. I will let you get back to it. Enjoy, be with your family. Moadim l'simcha.
Thank you so much. Stay well, stay dry. Thank you.
Thank you.